Up next, look at the press with Antonia Kerrigan. Antonia, you're beginning with new revelations on that airstrike on a primary school in Minab that killed more than 170 people.
That's quite right. The New York Times have the headline, US at fault in strike on school in Iran. The preliminary inquiry says this is the Pentagon's own findings to the effect that in the US intelligence, in the US target data, the building in question, this school, was listed as a military target. Now, this is because the school is here and there is a military base here. They were once part of one compound, but this perimeter wall was constructed between 2013 and 2016, meaning the two compounds are completely distinct. One is now a school. The New York Times journalist asked the question, why was outdated information on the nature of this building not double-checked before a Tomahawk strike was launched? Now, the Washington Post is also covering this, saying that the Iranian school was on the US target list and may have been mistaken as a military site. Indeed, leaks from the Pentagon, who spoke to Washington Post journalists, some have said that it was down on the list as an arms depot. Another has said it was a factory. There's clearly a lot of confusion around this strike and also subsequently clearly a certain amount of leaking. What's unclear, these journalists say, is was the building targeted on the basis of false information, or was it hit by accident? What's also in the Washington Post coverage is an account of a father who rushed to the school that day to collect his children when he understood bombing had begun, and he was outside the school when he was knocked off his feet by an explosion. He rushed in, hoping to find his children alive and safe. He said that not one of the children they pulled out the rubble was alive, and he had to go to the morgue later to find his 7-year-old and 9-year-old's bodies torn apart and burnt by the explosions at the morgue.
All right, moving on now to the UK, and there's fresh fallout over the Epstein files as it emerges that the Prime Minister knew more than he's let on about Peter Mandelson's ties to Jeffrey Epstein when he was appointed US ambassador.
That's quite right. It's on all of the UK front pages. If you look at the Times, the PM flouted Mandelson warnings on the Daily Mail. They're going very condemnatory. They're saying he is not fit to lead the country. And on the inside pages, they're even calling on the Labour parliamentary majority to oust Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Now, you've heard of the Epstein files. These are the Mandelson files, and as you see here, they are hitting Prime Minister Keir Starmer like a missile. On The Guardian, you have this editorial, excuse me, that's not the right one, I'll explain it to you anyway, by the political editor, saying that the Prime Minister was presented with a thick file of due diligence littered with red flags, warning of the reputational risk. That's what's mentioned in this article, the reputational risk, with detail on the particularly close relationship between Mandelson and Epstein, also reminding him that Mandelson stayed in Epstein's home while Epstein was serving time in prison for soliciting a minor, and also highlighting potential conflicts of interest. The list goes on. The editorial points out that this is just the first release of documents, that each one will continue to chip away at the Prime Minister's authority going forward, as it underlines potential judgment difficulties. The Daily Mirror has latched onto this one rather alarming detail, that Mandelson, when he was sacked as British ambassador to Washington, he rather shamelessly, in the words of the Daily Mirror, demanded a £500,000 payoff. In the end, he walked away with just $75,000, but that is a sum that likely many UK taxpayers and Epstein victims would find extremely generous as remuneration for continued ties to a known sex offender.
Indeed, Antonia. To finish off, though, you have some news about zoos.
I do. I'm glad you asked. So we'll start with the BBC and the Independent, who have this coverage of the zoo's outcry in the UK about misleading weather apps. They say that some zoos are losing tens of thousands of pounds per day when the weather is summed up on the weather apps by a single rainy icon. They're not disputing the weather data offered by these apps, but they're saying that they can be reductive. The rainy day icon can cause visitor numbers to drop by 30%, and sometimes the rain in question is nighttime rain, or sometimes it's very few hours of the day. Basically, it's time for some nuance when it comes to our weather apps. One other little gem of zoo-related news. This is the plucky young fox who boarded a transatlantic cargo ship in Southampton to pursue his American dream in the Big Apple. He's now living in the Bronx Zoo. It's not necessarily the Hollywood success story he hoped for, but he looks fairly happy and well-fed. And let's face it, he's an invasive species whose first instinct in an urban area is to overturn bins. So what on earth are they supposed to do in a city reputed for a rat problem than put him in the Bronx Zoo?
I don't know how to answer that question. I guess so. Thank you very much, Antonia Kerrigan, for that look at the papers. We'll be back after a few minutes break.